Welcome to the Orbital Sunrise podcast, sharing ideas that are catalysts for action to drive an inclusive and equitable world. Your hosts are
Elizabeth Harrison, ocean engineer, presenter, and engineering communicator and futurist.
And Ruth Harrison, aerospace engineer, space industry communicator, and diversity advocate.
This Orbital Sunrise podcast will educate and empower people by sharing the impacts of STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths. Our Series 1 key themes are unpacking the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 8, economic growth, humanising STEM, thought leadership, and engineering futurist.
We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are broadcasting today, acknowledge their continuing connection to the land, air and sea, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. If you would like to support our podcast, please share with your friends, leave a review, or check out our Patreon site. So welcome to the Orbital Sunrise podcast. Today we welcome Michael Holmstrom, CEO and founder of STEMPunks. STEMPunks offers curriculum-aligned industry-linked courses in STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, for students that are developed and delivered by teachers and leading innovators. Michael is an electrical engineer, helicopter pilot, drone pilot, as well as a successful entrepreneur. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on this Orbital Sunrise podcast, Michael. So first of all, what are your pronouns?
He, him.
He, him. And being elevator pitch is so important for younger people and students. Can you give us what your personal elevator pitch is?
So this is my personal one or the one I would do for my business?
You could do both if you like.
Are they different? Are they different?
Well, that's a very good point. I think I'm so entrenched with the current business. I think they probably both go hand in hand. I think the elevator pitch for STEMPunks is that STEMPunks is here to inspire kids all across the world with a mindset of innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. And we want to create the next generation of innovators by the work that we do all across the world.
Yeah, great.
And how does that align then with your personal one? Is that what you want to achieve as your personal elevator pitch?
Well, look, I think so. I think my journey, which we'll probably come to later on, is very much based on everything I've done since coming out of uni and coming out of Sweden back in the day has got to a point where I'm very passionate about a few things. And those things are education, kids, and really building the next generation of innovators. I think that's where they go hand in hand. I think that pitch is probably the same for me because I'm very passionate about this space.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great to have that passion on STEM. And you mentioned Sweden. So where are you talking to us today, Michael? And can you give us a little bit of background about where you've worked, grew up in the world, and yeah.
Yeah. So without taking the whole afternoon talking about where I'm coming from. So I think, look, I started my journey back in Sweden. I'm born and bred in a small town in Sweden. There's about 14,000 people. Used to be a very cold place, probably still is. Small place, not very much of a career pathway to do. And I sort of gathered my strength and got to uni, and that took me to Australia. So today I'm sitting in a really great place called Sanford Village, which is on the north side of Brisbane. So I think background-wise, I'm one of those weird guys who always knew what I wanted to be, which was an electrical engineer. I started studying resistor codes and transistor functions in grade 3. And I'm an absolute geek. I love that space. And from there on, I started pulling things apart in my garage, building stuff, breaking stuff, blowing stuff up. And from that sort of process, I learned that engineering is absolutely awesome. So long story short, left Sweden, came to Australia in 98 or 2000, got involved with University of Queensland, did a master's degree in engineering over there, and then started my first startup, which is called Ground Probe, which is one of the biggest success stories coming out of UQ. We went from 5 guys soldering stuff in a smaller room at UQ into building a global business. And I think today it's owned by Orica, and it's a global business. Pretty much every mine, open cut mine in the world, have the technology that we launched back in 2002. So that journey really formed who I am today. And I think that's a short intro to what I am and what I do.
Yeah, that's really great. And yeah, I worked in the geophysical and geotechnical space offshore, and it can, really quite exciting. There's some leaps on that technology as well in both the mining and resources. On that, so that's really good. And you definitely wouldn't have picked unless you told us that you're from Sweden. There's that Australian accent there, very present.
You'll hear it now. I'm an undercover Swede. There's a lot of twangs in there that is a bit of Swedish, but I've managed to keep that on the wrap for a long time now. So.
Oh yeah, you have to bring them out. Educate us on the Swedish.
So we feel that companies are shaped by their people. So we're interested in exploring what you've just discussed in some more detail. So firstly, where did STEMPunks come from? Where did the name come from? How did you create it?
Look, I'll do it in a two-part answer because the name and where it came from is a little bit different. So I think, I went through a process of starting up GroundPro with some amazing friends and making that into a global business. And I think I learned a lot from that journey. And then I looked at the school system. I had my own kids and I got quite frightened. I realized it's a massive gap in between what schools are providing and what the industry needs. And rather than sitting there and pointing fingers at the system saying everything is bad, I said, look, we got to do something about this. We have to be part of the solution to change this. And that's where STEMPunks came from. So what have I learned as an engineer was that coming out of university with multiple degrees, you think you know everything, but you don't. You know very little about the world, about people, and how you can apply these skills to solve problems. And that's what I learned through this startup phase of running through 4 or 5, 6 startups and then having my own kids. So I think STEMPunks came from the notion of we have to be part of the change and also a passion for education, technology, and STEM in general. Now, the name was very well crafted by my wife. So we started looking at STEM as an acronym back in the day, back in 2016. And we wanted to be a bit of a rebel in the game here to change education. That's where punks came in. And of course, STEAMpunks has been around for a long time. It's very hard to trademark. So we settled on STEMPunks. That's where the name came from.
Awesome.
Yeah, great.
So you mentioned that you got a bit scared when you saw the education system and with your own kids. So is that what drives you? And what do you hope your legacy is going to be?
Oh, look, what drives me is seeing the difference that we make. So today, STEMPunks programs are all over the world. We've got great programs in Ghana, Vietnam, the US, Europe, here in Australia. And it's the same content. It's the same content accessible for everyone. So creating that equity, diversity, equality, and education is very, very important to us. But what my big why is seeing kids and the change they go through. So I'll give you an example. If we engage with a normal school, we normally get given the high achievers and the talented kids. That's normally about 20 kids. Now, I refuse to believe that in a school of 1,200 people, there's only 25 gifted and talented kids. I think that the system as a whole doesn't support the framework to get all those kids to find their passion, find their talent, and execute that in whatever passion they want, whatever pathway they want to take. So when we engage with kids in schools, particularly, we ask deliberately for everyone to be involved. Get kids who are on the spectrum, that sits on the sidelines, they might not even fit into the system. And once they get through our process of learning, they come out going, wow, that was amazing. So I think seeing those changes in kids and seeing the difference we make, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And that's exactly what we're all about.
Yeah, that's so great. I really resonate with that around when you see like kids really get it and understanding, and then they get really lit up and excited.
Yeah.
And that's just really infectious, and it creates this energy, which is like, yeah, it energizes.
Yeah, definitely.
And what would you say have been the turning points that have led you to where you are? Has there been some moments in your life where you've gone, yeah, that I need to do something here or do something there, that have led you on your journey of entrepreneurship, of startups?
I think anyone who's gone through startup phases in their life, they realize that it's a very, very hard journey. You have to be half crazy to get onto that bandwagon in the first place. But on the other hand, once you get on it, it's very hard to get off it because you realize that it's basically up to you to create whatever future you want. And that's a very liberating feeling. We've had some pretty challenging times over the years. COVID, 2019, we grew the business tremendously. We won the Telstra Business Awards. We hired an amazing team. We diversified, as a good startup should do, into the overseas market with massive study groups. Then come 2020, February, March, April, we lost a massive amount of revenue in about 2 weeks' time. And at those points in time, you sort of say to yourself, well, hang on, why are we doing this? There's still a trench in my yard where I sort of walk around for 2 weeks and try to find the meaning of life. But what we did then, we basically said, okay, rather than now going back and doing nothing, because we are teaching kids and adults about innovation, how can we now sit down and do nothing when this is the best opportunity we ever had to innovate and be what we always should have been, which is reaching a global audience with amazing online content as well. So I think there's always good and bad things. There's a roller coaster. Startups is an absolute roller coaster. The big thing for us now, we're getting out of that sort of startup phase into a scale-up phase where we've got really scalable platforms and content, which is another challenge. It's very exciting because now you can engage with large clients, but it's got different challenges. The roller coaster will just continue.
Yeah, that I can really hear you on that roller coaster as I'm, trying to work on my own business consulting as well.
Yeah.
Definitely that COVID is, takes a hit with that. And I've had a look at some facts around the pandemic loss. Globally, it's 255 million full-time jobs lost, which is 4 times more than the financial crisis.
Yeah.
But there's definitely been some really good, upturns and kind of refocuses around, ways to do things better and how we reach more people, both in location and just, other, disabilities or other learning ways.
Definitely.
You can learn and, that's really, really good.
Do you think COVID then has been an opportunity that you might not have had otherwise to really develop your business in a different way?
That's a very good question. Probably a question I would ask myself right now, because this might sound a bit weird. And I've got the greatest respect for businesses who have suffered during the COVID time because we suffered tremendously as well. But looking back, COVID was the best thing that ever happened to our business. I'll explain why. If you look at our strategic plan that goes way before COVID, there was always a massive big line there, bolded, saying you have to diversify the way you deliver content and to make it scalable. And in our game of doing STEM education, we can go and do the one-on-one in schools and hire 1,000 people. It's not very scalable, not very cost-efficient way of delivering content either. So what COVID did for us was to force us to do what we always said we're going to do, to set up to be content producers. Because today, STEMPunks basically runs out of 2 studios. We do productions every single day of the week, live broadcasts. We got STEMPunks TV as well as a first streaming service online. So looking back, it is the best thing that ever happened to us because it forced us to do what we always should have done. Mind you, if you asked me that question in February 2020, the answer would have been a little bit different because at that point we lost a lot of revenue, mainly because of overseas contracts. But look, they're all coming back now. And today we got amazing platforms to grow from in an extremely scalable way. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I mean, STEMPunks has become a pretty big brand now. I don't know whether it's because I follow and see everything, but I mean, the amount of content that STEMPunks is producing now is amazing. How have you found dealing with schools and education in a different content way? Has that been a challenge? Have they been open to the different ways of your engaging with them?
Yeah, so we take a step back. So anyone that starts a company in the education sector, especially in Australia, hat off. It is the most conservative market in the world, all right? It is. And this is the same thing in the US. US is a little bit different, a bit more open, but it's a very hard gig. So, I mean, we spent probably the first 3 years building a brand to get respect in the school system. Now, I said, I'm an engineer, right? So the first thing I did was to hire the best possible educators we could, because we're about education, not about bits and bytes. So by having those educators there, dealing with that market, I think, long story short, I think that it's a very conservative market. What COVID has done, it's opened up the opportunity for schools to look at online external delivery as an option. And to be honest with you, if you look at this from a learning outcome point of view, there's still nothing that beats face-to-face. To walk into a room, to read the emotions, to read all the sentiments in that room and really focus on individuals, face-to-face is still the way to do it. Now, what COVID did was that I think schools realized that if we do a live program in the school, we can have live astronaut links from NASA, we can have from the moon base in Hawaii, people coming in, broadcasting to students live. And I think for schools to have access to that enormously rich content, that's where the value sits. Still, and also now teachers now become a facilitator of the learning process. So we are broadcasting into that classroom, but the teacher can take that content and then dissect that with the students. So teachers become what I believe they always should be, which is facilitator of a very rich learning process. We can inject that content, that expertise in that classroom, but still get those teachers to be what they always should have been. So long story short, I'm very passionate about this. I think what COVID did was to open up the eye from schools about the opportunities with online delivery. So today we run a lot of hybrid programs. If we engage them with a new school, I would never suggest an online program to start this off with. I would meet them. We'll deliver the content to build rapport, build a trust, and show them what we do. But then as a long-term scaffolded process for learning outcomes, the hybrid model is spot on. It works so well.
Yeah, engagement and connection is so good as well.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the hybrid model, I'm currently looking, you've got a background there where it says STEMPunks television.
Yes.
Is that a new thing or?
Yeah, so we launched STEMPunks television, STEMPunks TV last year, so STEMPunks.tv. So this is it's not really massively launched around the world yet. We're still running a bit of a beta mode, but STEMPunks TV is our streaming channel. So that's basically for the home market, for kids to learn. We're also seeing schools using this across the world, but it's more of it's a low-cost marketing channel for us to get into the homes, in with the kids, in with the teachers, and they get a really good view of what we do. And is anything here both for primary school kids, secondary school kids, and we're lucky because we have a big fan in a person called Mr. Brian Leckie. And Brian Leckie used to be the producer for Mythbusters back in the US. So Brian's worked with us now for about 12 months. He's a massive fan of what we do. He's the bit of the brain behind the content of STEMPunks TV, and he'll be part of our productions going forward. So I think for us, we want to give everyone access to the same amount of learning and really inspiring kids to take up STEM-related fields. That is the first touch point. Come in and see what STEM education can be, or STEM as a whole, and then create that passion for kids. So it's a very new platform. We're launching it now in the US this year. But going forward, we're content producers. We create really good educational content. Having platforms like this makes it very scalable.
It's all very exciting. I love it. It's fantastic. I wish I had this when I was a kid. Take a little bit of a diversion now. Yes. I just want to talk about sort of the ideas. And you said in your TED Talk that we need more people who can realize ideas rather than more ideas. So what skills or experience do you think people need to be able to take their fantastic ideas into reality?
Yeah, so that topic was quite controversial too, because TED is all about spreading ideas, and I'm saying that we don't need more ideas. But I did that deliberately just to get some attention, and it worked really well. So I think what I'm saying with that, what I mean by that to start off with, before we go into the skills, is that there's no lack of ideas. I've mentored amazing people out of university and in businesses for the past 10 years, and you meet people with amazing skills, multiple PhDs and master's degrees and all this stuff. They've got great knowledge, but they still struggle taking that idea into something of value. And this is what I mean, is that we need people who can transform ideas into value. So now we can go into the skills needed. To me, it's about, and having been through like multiple startups now too, and doing that mentoring too with brilliant people, is that it comes back to two fundamental fears. So as human beings, we are afraid of two key things. This is my own observation, right or wrong. You can tell me I'm wrong, but this is my personal observation. The first one is fear of failure, and the second one is fear of rejection. We don't like those things. As we grow up and we get our boyfriends and girlfriends and they let us down, they break up with us, rejection is a horrible thing. And we never want to get back and experience that again. And it just turns out that if you're going to be successful as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, you have to embrace failure. And if you're going to sell stuff, rejection is part of your daily life. So I think when it comes to skills, I think those personal skills in terms of, I'm a big fan of MVPs. And that means that rather than you sitting there polishing your app code or making this great little device that you've worked on for 10 years and you love it and your mom loves it and your friends love it, create something extremely fast at low cost. And the beautiful thing these days is that we've got so much technology. Like, look at this thing here. You've got 3D printing, for example. We can turn things into objects extremely fast if you're building a product, and then engage with your market. So I think there's a technical skill, yes, but I think it's more about the mindset. Get kids to understand design thinking, the fundamentals of design thinking, of empathy mapping, ideation, prototyping, evaluation. If you can master those 4 steps or 4 or 5 steps, that is what you need. I think that comes back to our ethos too, is that we're not there to turn kids into expert coders. I'm not there to sit for 30 terms and learn JavaScript. If that's what you want to do, great. I'm there to teach you can use those tools to transform ideas into outcomes. So honestly, if you asked me that question for me coming out of uni back in 98, I would have said, look, I've got all the skills I need. I've done my RF modulation, digital design. I know everything about technology. And then you realize, oh, it's actually people that I need to convince to create this value. So long story short, I'm very passionate. I can go on all day about this. I think the fundamental thing is this. I love design thinking as a concept. So if you can master that, understand the problem through empathy mapping, ideation, rapid prototyping, and evaluation, and overcome fear of failure and rejection, you'll be fine. And I mean, being an entrepreneur and being a business person at the age that I'm at, that's high risk. I've got a family, I've got kids, I've got a mortgage, I've got a house, that's high risk. I can still do a lot of that because I know the process really well now without increasing too much my risk. But being like 20 years old, man, go and fail. Just do it, all right? And iterate. You might go through 20 iterations of failure, but the things you learn and the things that you're going to experience that you won't experience through a book, that is just so valuable. So I'm going to let my passion rest a bit and just probably stop there. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
definitely.
I think that's really good. And that's a really good snapshot around your journey that like has evolved from your electrical stuff, your mining, going into space, area defense, and also though that, you know, developing the social technical systems around, you know, how people and technology interact in your actual business and delivering that, as well as other drones and things like that.
Yeah.
I really get that on the fear of failure and rejection. And, you know, there is a big risk aversion in Australia as well.
Oh, yes.
Actually tackling to say, like, it's okay to fail because, you know, the next time, you know, it might be a bit better and you might actually end up with a better product for that. And so you mentioned that, you know, that innovative training, the project against like problem-based thinking and design stuff, I think is a really interesting concept. Which we will talk about later. But first of all, what is your definition of innovation?
So I think innovation is exactly that thing, the transformation from idea into value. Because in the end, we have to create value out of it. I mean, there's something about innovation and being an inventor. They're two very different things to me. So you can sit in a shed and tinker along with your idea for the rest of your life if you want to. That's great. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. But if we're talking about true innovation for humanity, it has to create value. And that can be monetized value, that can be community value, it doesn't have to be about money. But I think innovation to me is that ability to transform the idea into value for people.
Yeah, that idea to value really kind of resonates with that problem-based thinking, design thinking as well. We were actually really solving that problem, finding the values and connecting.
I think just another thing on that too about innovation is that you see, I've been through this myself back in the day, is that you see that big companies hire an innovation manager, and that person is supposed to be in charge of innovation and manage innovation. Now, innovation is the mindset. It's a culture, right? So just to say that you're appointed now to innovate everything we do, that is an absolute flawed concept in my own experience. There might be amazing innovation managers out there. My personal experience, you have to focus on the culture, and that takes time. But once you get that mindset of low fear, low rejection fear as well, you get amazing things to happen. Because when you say the word innovation, I think people think about technology straight away. It doesn't have to be about technology. If we say it's about taking an idea into value, you can define value to whatever you want. So I just want to mention it, because that innovation piece gets very controversial quite quickly, because what do you mean by that? It's not about technology. It's about value to me in the end.
Yes. Yeah, and I think your example around innovation manager is a really good one, because, you know, when you're managing something, that's around control. When you control something in innovation, you don't. That doesn't necessarily give you the product that you want or the product that you really end up wanting. So I think it is a bit like it's something where you've got to really think about that and make sure that the way that's being managed, or that culture is being developed.
Yeah, because in a startup, that culture normally is natural. And the reason being is that the need to be innovative is driven by extreme necessity. If you don't innovate, you don't survive. And that's why you see big corporates are struggling, because you get this hierarchy happening. And the startup mentality, even though it's a roller coaster, has some amazing things that we can learn from. that can be incorporated into the corporate sector as well. It's just the bigger we get, the harder it gets to preserve that mentality, but it can be done.
Yeah, I could go on about all that corporate hierarchy, how, where innovation like thrives and just fly forward and other things like that.
Yep.
But yeah.
I think over my career, I've heard quite regularly that Australia is very good at ideas, but we're not very good at turning them into reality. And things have been changing. But do you think we've still got a way to go on that as a nation in the way that we look at risk, particularly? Because I think a lot of it does come down to, is this going to be a risky opportunity for us? And we seem very resistant to that.
Yeah, it's an interesting landscape because I think, the American culture, even though there's a lot of negatives and positives over there, I think they have that entrenched thing about not the tall poppy syndrome. They are willing to give anything a go. So I guess there's positives and negatives in the US culture as well that I might not really like, but I like that drive for, it's a good thing to succeed. It's a good thing to achieve things. And we don't really have that here in Australia. I think we're very conservative in Australia. And this is me coming from Sweden, which is probably even more conservative. I mean, I left Sweden because I didn't agree with the things about, you need to have this type of car and 2.5 kids and half a dog, and then you fit into the system, right? That doesn't gel with me at all. So I think without getting too passionate about Sweden, which I'll leave, is that I think in Australia, we have this very conservative culture. I think you're right, there's plenty of ideas around. And I think today, the opportunity we have is that there's so many amazing tools we can use that people are not aware about. We talk about things like additive manufacturing, we talk about IoT, all those beautiful tools that you can make amazing things out of. So it's a bit like, it's worse not having ideas because we're very creative people, right? I think that the opportunity we currently have is that educate everyone about the tools they can use to get that transformation to happen. Because I think if you're talking about the other way around, if you talk about a country that doesn't have the freedom of speech, they don't have the democracy that we have to flourish in terms of ideas, that is the harder thing to change. So we work with a lot of overseas countries where that is the issue. So if you talk an innovation program, you don't worry talking about the tools. We'll do that later. You got to change their way of thinking, the way of allowing themselves to step out and have an opinion. Now in Australia, we're not scared of having an opinion, right? That's all good. We should use that to our advantage. I think in our case, yes, there's challenges ahead for sure, but the culture, the business climate we have here is a really good foundation for amazing innovation. It's just that we have to educate ourselves what those opportunities are and also bring that capability onshore, right? Get this capability to make things again, to create things again. We got a bit lazy, I think. That's my personal opinion once again. I think we got lazy in terms of things just exist, you just buy this thing, just start making and creating our own things. From that comes this whole innovation spiral too, which is very positive for everyone.
I think I'm seeing that within the space industry at the moment. It's very, very full of lots of fantastic things that are being turned into commercial products and finding that value. It will be interesting to see how that ends up in the next 5 years. That's going to be a very critical time period for that industry. So I am seeing things changing, which is good, but I agree we need to be making things and using our skills, our really good skills and ideas to create things that change the world, really. Yeah,
definitely. And we can. We got the ideas, we got the culture, we got the right setup in terms of the democracy we have here. So it's very doable.
Yeah, that leads on to another question that we've got. And it's basically around this podcast about what we're trying to do and looking at how STEM works with society in certain areas, including, the space, defence, and the social and technical systems. So what do you think we need to do to create a world where technology and society works better together?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think when we engage with now kids and adults all across the world is that there's a perception. We have to break down some virtual barriers first. So let's have a look at something like AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning. The moment you talk to the general population about AI, there's a few things that pops up. The first thing is that this is a massive threat to me because you're going to automate me out of a job. So you can turn that around. So I think we've got to break down those virtual barriers. If you look at artificial intelligence, automation as a whole, machine learning, I think there's an amazing opportunity to get human beings to do what they're passionate about. For someone to sit there and do this sort of pick this part from here to here every single day of their life, that is a waste of life. And that's a very simple application of automation, right? So I think it's about changing how we think about these things, how we perceive these as threats or as amazing things to really get us to do what we want to do in life. So there's a big perception piece. I think before you start saying that we're going to roll out a massive program to make everyone into blockchain and AI experts, we got to make sure people understand what it is. Everything can be used for good or evil. We got to sort of amplify the good thing and then try to make, something like AI and blockchain is quite threatening words to say to someone who doesn't like technology. So I think rephrasing how those pieces of knowledge is and what they can do for you on a human level, that's where the work has to go into. And once you've got that under control, people once again will go off and learn the bits and bytes, how to apply this thing. But I think I started the conversation by saying that we're not there to turn kids into expert coders. We're there to light that spark of innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship. Once we light that spark, you'll go off and do your own thing. So I'm not sure if I sidetracked that question or I hit the mark, but to me, the biggest thing is about the mindset, right? It's about those virtual barriers. And this is the same thing for a primary school teacher or a secondary school teacher. If you rock up to a school and doing professional development and your opening statement is today, we're going to learn about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we're going to use JavaScript and C++ to implement the solution, you've lost them, right? Even I get lost. I mean, that's not what this is about. You might teach at some point in that learning journey, but make it human, make it understandable, and make it relative to what they're trying to achieve. So I think that is probably the most important thing that I see, to get technology to be more interlinked with society, make it relevant.
Yep. I think that leads on to another question that we've got around, STEM is part of everyone's lives. We can't get away from it, and I don't think everybody realizes how the impact that it has on them. So do you think it's important that we give kids particularly an awareness of how it impacts them? And whilst we don't want them to necessarily know the code of, Facebook or something, but understand what that impact has on their everyday lives. Do you think that's important?
I think it's really important for kids to understand how they can use all these amazing tools to solve problems with. And what I mean by that is that I think the days are gone where someone says, I'm going to be an accountant and do this for the rest of my life. I think kids get inspired by problems and solutions and how they can be part of that solution themselves to change the world to a better place. We see that with the young generation coming through in primary school, high school. That's a very passionate culture that's growing day by day, which is amazing. So I think rather than a lot of kids running around being passionate, which is awesome, that's the starting point, give them the tools they need to change the world quickly. Because in the end, if you're going to solve things like global warming, food crisis, water crisis, we need STEM to make that work. I think the answer sits in really good solutions, and the technology is there to make that happen. We just got to breach that gap between I have a passion, but I don't know how to take that passion idea into valuable solutions for humanity as a whole. So I think that's probably the biggest thing for me is that, and this comes back to, if you lead with technology, you attract the same cohort that always going to do the coding, robotics, and the drones and the rest of it, right? It's not about that. If you're going to get diversity, get girls into this as well, don't talk about coding, talk about problem solving, talk about design, right? Love that. Now, we will apply STEM skills and coding, and we'll probably use robots and drones at some point in that time frame as well, but you got to lead with something they can relate to and then get that passion to really be transformed into value. So hopefully I answered your question in there somewhere.
Yeah,
no, definitely.
I think, and what you said around, when you lead with technology, you can develop a code and you've got this piece of technology, this thing.
Yes.
But then it just sits there. And if it doesn't have value and you don't connect it with some sort of purpose or some sort of way where it's actually helping people,
yes,
you're not really creating anything. You just create it is left. But actually creating something with people just brings it so much more.
Yes,
you've got that integration aspect, which can be really powerful when that stuff happens. So touching on some of that fear of failure and failures. So in your TED talk that you did last year, you spoke around how you had some good businesses and some horrible businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So can you elaborate a little bit more about what you mean by horrible businesses and how is this and if this changed any of the way you've approached things?
Yeah, sure. So I think the horrible businesses were pretty much in the early days of me trying to be an entrepreneur and trying to solve problems. I think as I said to you, my background, even from like grade 2, 3, was very technology focused. I love technology. I love to pull stuff apart and solve these things together and to make things. But when I say the horrible businesses that I created, was probably there was too much focus on the widget and it didn't focus on the market. So when I said horrible business was that because they were very hard businesses to grow and to do something with. And looking back with the knowledge I got now, like, 10, 15 years later, is that the core reason they didn't work from the point of view of getting that transformation of idea to value was that I spent way too much time in the idea space. I was afraid to fail. I was afraid for rejection. I'm an engineer. Surely I've got all the answers. You don't have to even ask a question. I'm an engineer. I already know the answer before you ask the question. So then looking back, that naivety in terms of saying that, okay, you've got a widget and a solution, but if you're the only person that's seen it and the thing that is good, maybe it's not that good. So in short, it comes back to the lack of engagement. If you look at the design thinking cycle, the evaluation piece, the ideation piece, the empathy piece was very badly done, right? There was very little understanding of the emotional drivers for the solution in the end. And as an engineer, you love to make the most complicated things you can because that's what you're trained to do. Now, it might be that the solution is a very simple one, but if you don't understand the problem first, you've got no chance to get the solution right. So the empathy mapping failed. I think also the ideation was okay. The prototyping was okay because that's exciting to make things quickly. And then the evaluation failed as well because the fear was there to engage with the market. When someone says this is bad to an engineer, you're going, surely not, I'm an engineer. But now you're sort of going, great, you said this is bad. What is good? Anything good about this thing? No, cool. I'll come back in 2 weeks' time. Here it is. So those are the things that I refer back to horrible business. Now, horrible probably was a very ill-selected word because I learned a lot from that process. And I don't think I would be where I am today without that really understanding of, okay, failure is good, or, you can overcome these things, but, toughen up a little bit. So yeah, that's what I mean by horrible businesses.
Yeah, thanks for giving that little snapshot around that. And
right.
That fear of failure, I think, when you've got ideas there and you can develop something, but it's all about action and even like just sharing ideas and actually getting that moving along, so you're not stalling elsewhere. But
and on that note too, I've got a firm belief, and this is my personal opinion once again, is that the only difference between successful people and non-successful are people who actually did something. They got off the couch and they did something over and over again. So I think if there's a lesson to be learned, they just do it.
I think that's great. My favorite phrase or quote, I don't know who quoted, I'm going to misquote it, but it's feel the fear and do it anyway. So has there been a moment in your life where you've just almost gone, wow, that's a step too far, but I'm going to do it anyhow?
Yes, I guess okay, so I think the strategy I've developed over time is that, and you get this with confidence and experience too, is that when you start now with larger clients and you get opportunities that are worldwide, if you don't have a certain mindset, you might just back out of these things. So I think those sort of moments where you go, oh, is this good or bad? It's probably more based on, okay, I'm telling you we can do this. And if you can't fulfill that promise, you're shooting yourself in the foot big time. And you don't get two opportunities here. So I think today I have opportunity. I think I've got moments like that on a very regular basis where I sort of go, okay, I'll take a step back and I think in my head and then I just continue. But it's a very comfortable space these days because when I say, yep, we can do this, this is the way we're going to do it, I might not have all the answers. I've probably got about 70-80% sorted out in my head right there and then. But that last 30% or 20% would have scared the bejesus out of me back in 2000, 2005. I would have gone like, I've got no idea how to do this. Today, with the knowledge, experience, and the team I have, I know that if I can get to 70%, yeah, it's all good. 60, 50, I might go back and think of it a little bit and come back to you again. But if it hits 70%, we're just going to go for it because we can suss out the rest. We're smart enough to learn and to do this in the right way.
So I think we're starting to run out a little bit of time here, and we've got two very important questions still for you.
Yes.
So tell us what you're reading at the moment, or what have you read recently that's changed the way you think or your outlook?
Look, so I rarely read a lot of books. I read manuals as an engineer. I love manuals. Anyway, I read a book called Rocket Fuel by a person called Gino Wickman. And what Rocket Fuel, it got given to me over Christmas. And I picked it up and I couldn't put it down. So that book tells a story about the typical startup scenario. We've got a very passionate person, in this case, me, trying to sort of get everything going. And it really puts into, when you read the book, you can see yourself pretty much line by line, the emotions and what you're going through as a, with the passion, the driver, the leader of the business. And then it also relates back to the people that you need to support that ongoing growth. Because it's one thing to be passionate and have energy, but when the business grows, you can't do it by yourself. So then that book really put into context of what kind of people I need now to get this to the next level. And the next level for us to scale is that scale up phase, is to now to go global and make this the biggest thing we can. And in that process, it's all good to be passionate about things, but you can't do it on your own. So that's a great, if you're in that sort of phase of, I've got a startup, I'm about to scale it up, Rocket Fuel, Gina Wickman, great book, because it really puts in perspective what you need as the framework and infrastructure to support that growth beyond yourself.
Yeah, that's so great.
Sounds really good. To that in the show notes, I think.
Yeah, I think that definitely does good. So that I think that the scalability of businesses and where that grows is, it's a really big aspect. And part of that also comes down to delegation.
Yes.
And even in engineering, very few managers are really good at delegation, and it's a skill that you have to learn.
Yes.
And you have to be able to trust and give people a task and make them accountable to do that. So yeah, that sounds really, really good book actually.
I think even in the startup world as well, it's hard to pass on your passion to somebody else, because there's that little bit of you that's like, no one's going to be as passionate as I am about what I'm trying to achieve. And so you have to take that step back and go, you can't do it all, because it's just not possible.
Yep. No.
So our last question that we'll be asking every one of our podcast guests is, so if 42 is the answer to the universal question of life, or the question of life, the universe and everything, what do you think we need to achieve it?
Wow, you stunned me now. Ask that question again. This is the question I did miss on the brief. So ask that question again, see if I can do a very smart ending to this thing. It's going to only go two ways.
So if 42 is the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe and everything, what do we need to achieve it?
Wow. We need innovative, entrepreneurial, creative mindsets that can really put in place all the automation, everything we need for people all across the world to do what they're passionate about. So stop wasting our life in doing things we don't like to do. Do the passionate things that we want to do and start creating value for everyone. So I think if the meaning of life is to be passionate and sort of live your life to the full, STEM, everything we do in STEM education, automation, artificial intelligence is the key to make that happen. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally agree.
Yeah, and it's actually reminded me, you've got 3 words that you advertise with your CEO of STEMPunks about inspiring tomorrow's innovators. And I think that, that rounds up what you've just said as well. So, yeah, thank you for coming and being part of this podcast. And, yeah, it's great to have that engineer at heart from that little kid growing up in Sweden all the way through to now. It's been good to unpack some of that aspects.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you so much for being our first guest, Michael. We really appreciate it. It's been really interesting talking to you. I'm really inspired now.
That's good. And go and read that book. It's a great book. So thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you.